The UAP Herald Case File 013 Papua New Guinea Overflights. It is the evening of the 24th of January 1985 on the north coast of Papua New Guinea. In the town of Wewak, on the edge of the Sepik River basin, people are looking up and they are afraid. Something is crossing the sky at great height and great speed. Lights, long white trails hanging in the dark, and a sound. Not one aircraft, but several, coming and going over the course of the night. A commercial airline pilot, lifting off from the Wewak Strip, watches his own radar paint a target overhead. Something fast, something high, running the length of the coast. By morning, the fear has a shape the government cannot ignore. The provincial premier calls a public meeting, and the prime minister of the entire nation, home for the weekend in his own district, walks in and sits down at it. Within 4 days, a young country's intelligence service does the quiet, sensible thing. It goes to the one government in the neighborhood with the biggest air force, and it asks a simple question: were those your planes? The United States Embassy in Port Moresby checks its records. It picks up the telephone to a bomber wing on Guam, and then it types a 3-page cable, classifies it at the lowest level there is, and sends it to the American Pacific Command, to 2 more embassies, and to the Secretary of State. In it, the embassy tells the Papua New Guineans exactly what it found. Not us. No American aircraft. And then, at the bottom, it turns to its own military and asks a question of its own. Quote, any light you might throw on these reports. Tonight, a real United States State Department cable released in full that sat in the files for 41 years. A frightened town, a pilot's radar, a superpower that said it wasn't them. And the question nobody in the file ever answered: whose aircraft were over Papua New Guinea that night? Start, as we always do, with the object in your hand, because here the document is the case. There is no photograph, there is no film, there is no witness on camera. There is a piece of paper, a diplomatic cable, 3 pages. A State Department cable is the nervous system of American foreign policy, the message traffic that runs day and night between Washington and its embassies around the world. It has a rigid, unmistakable shape, a header block of routing codes, a subject line, numbered paragraphs, a drafter's name, an end mark. And it is contemporaneous, not a memoir written decades later, but the report filed inside 4 days, while the meeting was still fresh, and before anyone involved had a story to sell. Look at the header, because the header is a fingerprint. The message reference number:
85 Port Moresby 199.
85 for the year. Port Moresby, the capital of Papua New Guinea, where the embassy sits. 199, the cable's serial number for the year. It was drafted at 6:53 in the morning, Zulu time, on the 28th of January, 1985. The subject line states the whole affair in 5 flat teleprinter words.
Papua New Guinea inquiry regarding overflights.
Overflights, not sightings, not phenomena. Overflights, the language of air forces and sovereign airspace. Hold on to that word, because it tells you how this government filed the matter from the first keystroke, not as a saucer story, but as a question about whose airplanes were crossing whose sky. Now the classification, and read it carefully, because it cuts against every instinct you have about a government hiding a UFO.
Limited official use.
Limited official use. In the American classification system, that is the lowest formal handling caveat there is, a rung below confidential, far below secret. Sensitive, keep it in channels, but not a classified secret. The embassy could have wrapped this in any level of protection it wanted, and chose almost none. When the document was released, 41 years later, The stamp confirmed the point in 3 words: released in full. Not a single black bar on any of the 3 pages. And look at who it was sent to, because in cable culture, the distribution list is half the message. The action addressee, the office expected to do something, is not the Secretary of State. It is the American military.
To USCINCPAC Honolulu, immediate. For J3 and the political advisor. Information copies to the 43rd Strategic Wing, Anderson Air Force Base, Guam, immediate. To the Secretary of State, Washington. To the American Embassy, Canberra. And to the American Embassy, Jakarta.
Feel the shape of that list. USCINCPAC, the United States Commander-in-Chief, Pacific, the 4-star headquarters that runs every American soldier, ship, and aircraft across half the globe, marked immediate. A strategic air command bomber wing on Guam, and 2 neighboring embassies, Canberra, capital of Australia, Papua New Guinea's former administering power, and Jakarta, capital of Indonesia, the country that shares the island of New Guinea and its long, tense land border. A report of unexplained aircraft over one small nation was staffed inside a day to the entire regional military and diplomatic apparatus. One small forensic wrinkle, because we read these honestly, the computer cover sheet generated for the release lists the Action Office as USCINCLANT, Atlantic, the wrong ocean. The body of the cable is unambiguous, USCINCPAC, the Pacific. The cover sheet is a downstream data error. The cable is authoritative. We flag it so you know we looked. It is signed with one surname.
Gardner.
Gardner, by 1985 convention, the senior embassy officer signing the message out. No first name, no rank in the text, and it closes with the old teletype terminator. 3 letters, NNN, and on the final page, a single administrative line. Dissemination rule, archive copy. And here is the chain of custody, because provenance is the entire credibility of a document like this. This paper did not fall out of the sky in 2026. Its road into daylight is short and clean.
It was written and transmitted on the 28th of January 1985 and filed as an archive copy. On the 25th of February 2026, the State Department cleared it, quote, released in full over the name of Acting Director John Powers. And on the 8th of May 2026, the Department of War posted it with more than 160 other files on its public UAP portal under the program the government calls PURSUE, the Presidential Unsealing and Reporting System for UAP Encounters. It carries a release index dated the 2nd of March 2026 on every page.
On honest note, our own first pass logged this as a December 2026 release. The independent record is firmer, so we use it. The stamp says, released in full on the 25th of February, and it went public at war.gov on the 8th of May, 2026. That is the date you can check tonight. A genuine United States government record, published by the government itself, and within the State Department's contribution to that release, it is the very first cable in the series. In the file system, D1, the oldest one they chose to show. The question is what it says and how much of it we can stand behind. So let us read it the way it was written, in 4 numbered paragraphs, and separate at every step what the cable actually reports from what we can independently confirm. Because this event has one honest limit you deserve up front. Outside this cable, there is essentially no other record of it. The most complete archive of Papua New Guinea sightings does not list the night of the 24th of January at all, so everything in paragraph 1 is the cable's account, the embassy's summary of what it was told, and we will hold it exactly that way. Here is how the file opens.
Embassy January 28 received informal inquiry from PNG National Intelligence Organization concerning reported sightings of high-altitude, high-speed aircraft over PNG during evening January 24.
Every noun matters. The inquiry is informal. One intelligence service quietly asking another government a question off the books. It comes from the PNG National Intelligence Organization, the young country's civilian intelligence service. And the subject is not lights or objects. It is, in the cable's own words, high-altitude, high-speed aircraft. The government of Papua New Guinea did not think it had seen a spaceship. It thought it had seen airplanes, high and fast, that it could not account for. Then the cable tells you how the matter climbed.
Matter came to NIO's attention when its officer in Wewak reported local residents had been frightened by overflights, which led to the provincial premier's calling of a public meeting on the subject attended by the Prime Minister, who was weekending in his electoral district.
Trace that escalation, because it is the human heart of the file. It starts at the bottom with ordinary people. Residents of Wewak, a coastal town, the capital of East Sepik province, are frightened by overflights in the night. The intelligence service's local officer notices and reports it up the chain. The provincial premier, the top elected official of the province, decides this is serious enough to call a public meeting about it. And the Prime Minister of the entire nation attends that meeting in person. Now, the cable is careful to tell you why the Prime Minister was there. He was weekending in his electoral district, so let us not overstate it. He did not fly across the country for a UFO summit. He was home, and the meeting was in his backyard. But sit with it anyway. Within roughly 96 hours, a fright in a provincial town had climbed all the way to the head of government, in public. That is not how a hoax or a single drunk story usually behaves. Something was seen by enough people over a wide enough area to become a political fact at the national level almost overnight. The cable does not name the Prime Minister. A cable rarely names a head of state everyone in the loop already knows. The historical record does, and we give it as independently verified context, not as something the document says. In January 1985, the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea was Sir Michael Somare, the founding father of the country, the man who had led it to independence from Australia 10 years earlier in 1975. Later that same year, he would be voted out of office. But that January, the nation's founder sat in a hall in East Sepik and listened to his own people describe aircraft they were afraid of. And to understand why a whole province could be frightened of airplanes, you have to understand where Papua New Guinea sat in 1985, a barely 10-year-old nation on the frontier of three of the largest military establishments on Earth. We will come to that. First, the best piece of evidence in the file, the one report the intelligence service itself trusted. Paragraph 2 is where the cable stops summarizing rumor and starts sorting evidence. And it does something you rarely see in a report like this. It grades its own sources. Watch it separate the noise from the signal.
NIO said there have been various reports of unidentified aerial phenomena the night of January 24, including fast-moving objects with lights, contrails, and noise.
There is the phrase, unidentified aerial phenomena. In 1985, decades before UAP became a Pentagon acronym on the evening news, a State Department cable is already using almost exactly that language to describe what a foreign intelligence service told it. And the phenomena themselves are described in three plain registers. Fast-moving objects with lights, that is the eye, contrails, that is a physical track left in the air, and noise, that is the ear. Whatever this was, people saw it, and they heard it. But the cable does not treat all of those reports as equal. It points deliberately at one.
The report in which NIO places some credence originated with an Air New Guinea pilot who had just taken off from Wewak en route Port Moresby.
The report in which NIO places some credence. Out of a stack of citizen reports, lights, noise, fear, the intelligence service flagged one as worth the Americans' attention. And the one it chose is the best kind of witness you can have. Air New Guinea is the flag carrier of Papua New Guinea, founded in 1973, flying the routes that stitch a country of mountains and islands together. The witness is not a frightened villager. He is a professional pilot, in the cockpit, doing his job. And it is not what his eyes saw that mattered. It is what his instruments saw.
Pilot said his radar picked up aircraft flying south to north at high altitude and high speed when he was over Angaram. Vicinity 4 degrees south, 144 degrees east.
His radar picked it up. This is the sentence that lifts the case above 1,000 lights in the sky reports. An instrument return from an aircraft's own radar on something high, fast, and moving south to north, while the airliner was over Angaram, a town on the Sepik River, at a position the pilot pins to about 4 degrees south, 144 degrees east. He gives a grid reference. He is behaving like an aviator making a report, not a witness telling a ghost story. Then the cable widens back out to the ground observers and gives you the one detail that has kept investigators staring at this file.
Several visual sightings of contrails were also reported from various points around PNG, of one aircraft moving north to south at 1900 local and of 6 to 8 aircraft traveling south to north at 2200 local.
Read that geometry slowly. At 7 in the evening, one aircraft heading north to south. 3 hours later, at 10 at night, 6 to 8 aircraft heading south to north, the opposite direction. One going out at dusk, a formation of 6 to 8, coming back 3 hours later. The cable does not draw a conclusion from that, and neither will we assert one. But you can see the shape that made a provincial premier call a meeting. It reads like a mission. A single aircraft out, a package of several back. High, fast in formation, over a country whose own tiny air arm flew nothing remotely like it. And here is independent context, kept carefully separate from the cable. This was not the first time Air New Guinea pilots had reported this. 6 years earlier, in 1979, in the Gusap area, a former PNG transport minister told the national parliament that Air New Guinea pilots had repeatedly seen unexplained objects and tracked their speed on radar, with villagers again frightened below. A separate event, from the public record, not this cable, but it tells you that airline pilots radar tracking things they could not identify was, in Papua New Guinea, a known and recurring pattern, which makes the 1985 report read less like a fluke and more like one more entry in a file the country had kept for years. Paragraph 3 is the United States government's answer, and it is the paragraph everyone remembers, because it is a superpower on the record saying it doesn't know either. Here is the whole of it.
Based on our records in Telcon with 43rd Strategic Wing, we have told NIO we knew of no B-52 overflights and no U.S. aircraft in PNG airspace on January 24.
The embassy did the work before it answered. It checked its own records, and it made a telephone call, a telcon, to the 43rd Strategic Wing. And on that basis, it told the Papua New Guineans flatly 2 things: no B-52 overflights and no United States aircraft in PNG airspace on the 24th of January. Now, why on earth would a bomber wing be the first phone call? Why is the reflex answer to unexplained high-altitude aircraft over the South Pacific? Was it our B-52s? For that, you have to know what was sitting on Guam.
The 43rd Strategic Wing was based at Andersen Air Force Base on Guam, Strategic Air Command's westernmost bomber base in the Pacific. In 1985, it flew the B-52 Stratofortress, 8-engined heavy bombers, by then armed for both nuclear deterrence and with the Harpoon missile anti-ship strike. From Guam, those aircraft ranged across the entire Western Pacific. A high, fast, many-engined aircraft crossing the skies north of Australia was far more often than not American.
That is why the B-52 was the first suspect, and why the denial is so telling. The embassy did not shrug. It went straight to the most likely mundane answer. Its own Air Force checked it and ruled it out, but read the denial with a lawyer's eye, because the precision is the point. No B-52 overflights, no U.S. aircraft in PNG airspace on January 24. Every word of that is scoped. It denies American aircraft inside PNG airspace on that one date. It does not deny American aircraft operating just outside PNG's borders, and it says nothing about any other nation's aircraft, because the embassy could not. The United States answered honestly for itself, and only for itself. It closed the American door, and left every other door in the region standing open. And then, in paragraph 4, comes the sentence that gives the case its honest ache, because the drafter admits how thin the whole thing is.
Although information provided us on these sightings is very sketchy, and sources were unsure of the directions in which aircraft were flying, we would most appreciate confirmation of Para 3 above and any light you might throw on these reports.
Very sketchy. Sources unsure of the directions. The embassy is telling its own Pacific Command, in writing, do not overread this. The data is soft, and even those neat directions, north to south and south to north, may not be reliable. That is a rare and admirable piece of candor in an official document. It is the sound of a professional refusing to inflate his own report, and yet, having discounted his own evidence, he still sends it, immediate, to a 4-star command and asks 2 things: confirm paragraph 3, confirm that it really wasn't us, and, quote, any light you might throw on these reports. That is a request for help. A United States embassy, having ruled out its own military, turning to the largest military command in the Pacific and asking in effect, you have the radars and the tracking we don't. Do you know what was over Papua New Guinea that night? And here is the hole at the center of the file. There is no answer in it. The cable is the outbound question. Whatever USCINCPAC wrote back, if it wrote back, is not in this release. The last word in the document is a request for an explanation that the document never receives. So, let us do the thing the cable itself invites and ask the honest question at the center of this case. Not what alien craft was over Papua New Guinea. The cable never says alien, and neither will we. The question the document actually raises is narrower and in some ways stranger. Whose aircraft were they? Because in January 1985, the sky over Papua New Guinea was one of the most militarily crowded neighborhoods on the planet, and a 10-year-old nation with almost no air force of its own sat right in the middle of it. Lay out the candidates and understand these are candidates, verified context, not the cable's conclusions and not ours. The document names none of them.
Candidate 1 is the one the embassy itself raised and denied: American Strategic Aviation. Strategic Air Command B-52s out of Guam ranged across the Western Pacific constantly. The embassy's own reflex was to check them first. On the record it says, not that night, not in PNG airspace.
So the Americans said, not us, for their own aircraft, inside PNG. Which leaves the other air forces that used that sky, and neither of the next two was the United States.
Candidate 2 is Soviet. Through the 1980s, the Soviet Union operated long-range maritime patrol and reconnaissance aircraft. The Tupolev Tu-95 Bear, the Tu-16, the Tu-142, out of Cam Ranh Bay in Vietnam, their largest naval base outside Europe. Those aircraft flew high, fast and far, shadowing American fleets and exercises across the Western Pacific. Sometimes in numbers, sometimes brushing airspace they were not welcome in. A high-altitude, high-speed transit north of Australia was as plausibly Soviet as anything.
A superpower's reconnaissance aircraft, ranging the Pacific from a base in Vietnam, would owe Papua New Guinea no flight plan and no explanation. If a package of Soviet bears crossed that corner of the map at altitude, a frightened town and a puzzled airline pilot is exactly the ground signature you would expect. And the United States, watching only its own aircraft, could honestly say none of ours were there. And then there is the candidate, hiding in plain sight, on the cable's own distribution list.
Candidate 3 is Indonesia, and it is why Jakarta is copied on this cable. In 1984, the year before, more than 10,000 refugees had fled across the border from Indonesian-controlled West Papua into Papua New Guinea, driven out by an Indonesian military campaign against the Free Papua movement. The Indonesian armed forces mounted cross-border operations, and Papua New Guinea repeatedly protested violations of its border and its airspace. In early 1985, the frontier was raw, and PNG was genuinely afraid of Indonesian military aircraft over its territory.
Now, the escalation in paragraph 1 reads differently, doesn't it? A province on edge, a public meeting, a prime minister listening. Set against a live border crisis with a far larger neighbor, a night of unexplained high, fast aircraft is not a curiosity. It is a national security fright. That is very likely why the cable is copied to Jakarta and Canberra and routed to political military affairs and to state's own intelligence bureau. This was staffed as a real question about real airplanes and real borders. So here is the honest thesis of this file, more interesting than a saucer. Papua New Guinea in 1985 was a young, nearly defenseless nation sharing its sky with 3 of the largest military powers on Earth: American bombers from Guam, Soviet reconnaissance from Vietnam, a tense Indonesian military across a disputed border. On the night of the 24th, high, fast aircraft crossed that sky, frightened a province, and lit up an airline pilot's radar. The one government that could clear its own name did. The United States said, "Not us." And then even it turned to its own Pacific Command for help identifying what was there. The mystery of this cable is not from another world. It is that, on a crowded Cold War frontier, a whole nation looked up, and nobody in the file could tell it whose planes those were. Now the skeptic's corner, where we hand the microphone honestly to the other side, because credibility is the only thing this channel actually sells. And I want to be clear, on this one, the skeptic has the stronger hand, and the cable itself agrees with him. Let's take the case apart.
Begin with the drafter's own confession. He calls his information, quote, very sketchy, and admits his sources were unsure which direction the aircraft were even flying. That is not my characterization. That is the United States Embassy grading its own evidence in writing as poor. When the primary source tells you the data is soft, believe him, and notice what dissolves if he is right. The whole haunting geometry, 1 out at dusk, 6 to 8, back at 10, depends on the directions being accurate. The cable says they may not be. Take away reliable directions, and your mission profile becomes a handful of confused reports of lights moving at night.
That is the single strongest point against reading anything exotic into this file, and I will not flinch from it. The pattern that makes the case eerie is a pattern the document explicitly warns you may be an artifact of bad reporting. Keep going.
Then the numbers, 6 to 8 aircraft counted by contrail from the ground at night. Counting distinct objects by the trails they leave, in the dark from scattered points, is notoriously unreliable. One long trail can be read as several, several can merge into one, and contrails at night are barely visible at all, unless there is moonlight or high haze to catch them, which raises a fair question about how confidently anyone counted anything. As for the noise, sound travels strangely at night, and a single high jet can be heard across a wide area and reported as many. And the radar, the crown jewel of the case. An airliner's radar in 1985 is a weather and navigation radar. It is designed to paint storm cells and coastlines, not to track and identify high-flying aircraft. A commercial pilot saying my radar picked up aircraft is suggestive, but it is not an air defense track. It is not a recorded plot, and no tape or readout survives in this file. We have a second-hand summary relayed by an intelligence service of what one pilot said his radar showed. That is a long way from a hard target.
Every word of that is fair, and it is the responsible way to hold the evidence. Add the rest of the ledger, coldly. There is no photograph, there is no radar tape, there is no independent confirmation of the event anywhere outside this one cable. The most complete archive of Papua New Guinea sightings does not even list the night. There is no reply from Pacific Command in the file. And the natural world offers its own candidates for at least part of a night of lights, trails, and noise. A bright meteor or a piece of re-entering space debris can throw light and a visible trail across a wide area, and a rocket body tumbling high up can be seen from many points at once. We found no record of a specific fireball or re-entry over the South Pacific that night, so we raise those only as categories, not as a claimed event. And yet the skeptic does not get to keep the whole board, so put the fair counterweight down beside him. The witnesses here are not the usual material. The report the intelligence service chose to forward came from a professional airline pilot with an instrument, not a spooked bystander. And PNG's own service filtered its reports and pushed that one forward. The sightings were widespread enough to frighten a province and pull in a prime minister within days. Mass panic is possible, but it usually needs something real to start it. And the United States answer is a genuine, documented negative. It really did check, and really did say, none of ours. That does not make the objects extraordinary. It does mean the identity of what crossed that sky is honestly, not lazily, open. So weigh it the way we weigh everything. One cable, no photograph, no tape, no independent witness, no reply, and a drafter who called his own data very sketchy. On our evidence scale, that is weak evidence for anything from beyond the Earth, and the cable never claims that much. But it is a strong, authentic record of a real diplomatic event, a night when a nation was frightened of its own sky, and the biggest government in the neighborhood could only tell it what the lights were not. The likeliest answer is entirely of this world, somebody's aircraft, or a mix of aircraft and misperception. We just cannot tell you whose, and neither in the end could they. Before we file it, step back and look at the shelf this cable sits on. Because a single document is a curiosity, and a pattern is a fact. This is not an orphan. It is one entry in a habit the United States has kept, quietly, for decades.
The 2026 release includes a run of State Department cables and memos about unexplained aerial phenomena stretching across half a century, an internal state memo in 1952, a memo touching the subject in 1963, Papua New Guinea in 1985, Kazakhstan in 1994, Tbilisi in Georgia in 2001, Mexico in 2003, Ashgabat in Turkmenistan in 2004, Diplomats around the world for 40 years sending the same kind of message home. Our people or the local government saw something in the sky, and we are putting it on the record.
And of the actual foreign sighting cables in that run, Papua New Guinea, 1985, is the earliest, filed as D1, where this thread of the story begins. Now hear the echo, because we read the next chapter on this very channel. 9 years after Port Moresby, a United States embassy in Central Asia cabled Washington about 3 American pilots who watched a bright object maneuver for 40 minutes over Kazakhstan and flew beneath its contrails at dawn. Different ocean, different decade, the same institutional reflex, almost word for word, a credible aviation witness, an instrument or a physical trace, a careful embassy that writes it all down, routes it to the intelligence agencies and the military, and declines to conclude a thing. In Kazakhstan, the closing line was, "We have no opinion, and report the above for what it may be worth." In Papua New Guinea, the information is very sketchy, but any light you might throw. That is the real revelation of a document like this. Not a saucer, a posture. For decades, the United States has run a low-key, worldwide channel for exactly these reports, filed at the lowest classification or none at all, routed to everyone who mattered, closed with a shrug and a request for help. The government neither confirms nor dismisses, it simply files. And Papua New Guinea, 1985, is where the filing in this release starts. So let us put it on the record in order, the way the file earns it.
1973. Air Niugini, the national airline, is founded. 1975. Papua New Guinea becomes independent from Australia, with Michael Somare as its first prime minister. 1979. In the Gusap area, Air Niugini pilots report radar-tracked objects and frightened villagers. The matter is raised in the national parliament, a separate event, but the same signature. 1984. More than 10,000 refugees flee across the border from West Papua into PNG amid an Indonesian military campaign. PNG protests repeated border and airspace violations. The frontier is raw.
The evening of the 24th of January 1985, over Papua New Guinea, contrails of 1 aircraft north to south at 1900 local, 6 to 8 aircraft south to north at 2200 local, an Air Niugini pilot's radar paints a high, fast target over Angoram. Residents in Wewak are frightened. A public meeting is called and the Prime Minister attends. The 28th of January, the PNG National Intelligence Organization makes its informal inquiry to the US Embassy. The embassy telephones the 43rd Strategic Wing on Guam and tells the NIO it knows of no B-52 overflights and no US aircraft in PNG airspace on the 24th. The same morning, 6:53 Zulu, the embassy transmits cable 85 Port Moresby 199, limited official use to US CINCPAC, and info to Guam, the Secretary of State, Canberra and Jakarta, asking for confirmation and any light Pacific Command might throw. No reply survives in the file.
The 25th of February, 2026, the State Department clears the cable, released in full. The 8th of May, 2026, the Department of War posts it publicly under Pursue at war.gov as the first of its State Department UAP cables, and the overflights of January 1985 finally have a permanent, official public address.
So, what do we actually know? We know this is a genuine United States State Department cable, limited official use, contemporaneous, released in full, and hosted today on a government website. We know its content for certain because we can read every unredacted word that on the 28th of January 1985, Papua New Guinea's intelligence service formally asked the US Embassy about high-altitude, high-speed aircraft reported over the country on the night of the 24th, that the reports included lights, contrails, and noise, that the one the PNG service trusted came from an Air New Guinea pilot whose radar painted a fast, high target over Angoram. That residents were frightened, a public meeting was held, and the Prime Minister attended, and that the embassy, after checking its records and calling the bomber wing on Guam, told PNG it knew of no B-52 overflights and no U.S. aircraft in PNG airspace that night, and asked its own Pacific Command for any light it could throw. All of that we know because the document says it plainly. What we do not know is what the objects were or whose they were. We do not know if they were aircraft at all, though the cable and its witnesses plainly assumed they were. We do not have the pilot's name or his radar tape. It is gone. We do not have any reply from Pacific Command. It is not in the file. And we have to be straight about the biggest limit of all. This event is single source. This one cable is, as far as the public record shows, the only record that the night of the 24th of January 1985 happened at all. No independent witness, no second document, no photograph corroborates the sighting itself. This cable is not proof of anything from beyond the Earth, and to its credit, it never pretends to be. It is an honest, contemporaneous record of a real fright over a real country, filed by a government that checked its own aircraft, cleared its own name, and then admitted it did not know the rest. Unresolved is not the same word as unexplained, and it is a very long way from confirmed. In the end, the most impressive thing in this file is not the lights, it is the restraint of everyone who touched it. A young nation that, frightened of its own sky, did not shout. It asked a careful question. An intelligence service that sorted its reports and forwarded only the one it trusted. An embassy that checked the records, phoned the bomber wing, told the truth, not us, and then had the honesty to call its own evidence very sketchy and ask for help anyway. Nobody in this document claimed to know more than they did, so we will do the same. Papua New Guinea, January 1985. A frightened town, a pilot's radar, high, fast aircraft over a crowded Cold War sky, and a superpower that could only say whose they were not. Real, recorded, and still, honestly, unresolved. Case File 013, Papua New Guinea overflights. Every page read, every claim checked against the record by an autonomous AI investigation. The UAP Herald, declassified, investigated, filed.